again there may be change in the behavior. But we can observe a particular behavior because of learning up to a certain period of time. And if we see the factors of learning, especially experiences and practice, these two play an important role in learning. So how can we learn something? We can learn something by practice. We can learn something by experiencing it. So whenever we want to call a behavioral change as the result of learning, then there should be these two components. That means when we get a behavioral change because of experience or because of practice, then it is known as learning. If we see our day-to-day life, we learn different things or various contents by using different ways. That means we use different ways to learn different things. If we take famous educational psychologist Benjamin Bloom, Bloom developed a classification of intellectual behavior and learning into 3 domains. So Bloom divided or classified our intellectual behavior and our learning into 3 domains. This particular Bloom's classification has been playing a central role in teaching learning process since its development. That means this particular concept was developed in the year 1956. Since then, it has been influencing the teaching learning process across the globe. So Benjamin Bloom classification is very much important when we are studying educational psychology. Let us see more clearly, more elaborately, what does Benjamin Bloom proposes. One more important thing here we have to remember is, as part of our daily life, we learn various skills, various mental skills, and also we develop our attitudes and we acquire new physical skills. These domains of learning can be categorized as cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain. These 3 cognitive, affective, psychomotor domains are classified by Benjamin Bloom. So this best explained by a group of researchers led by eminent psychologist Benjamin Bloom. When we see the cognitive domain, it is related to knowledge. When we take affective domain, it is related to attitudes. And when we take psychomotor domain, it is related to various skills. Let us see further these 3 domains. It comes under Bloom's taxonomy. So Benjamin Bloom, full name is Benjamin Samuel Bloom, was an American educational psychologist. He made important contributions to the classification of educational objectives and also to the theory of learning. So when it comes to theory of learning or when it comes to classification of educational objectives, we have to remember Benjamin Bloom. Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy is very important in our educational process. It was created in the year 1956 under the leadership of Benjamin Bloom. It is proposed to promote higher forms of thinking such as analysis, evaluation, etc., rather than rote memorization or remembering facts. So when a child learns something, the child simply may remember certain facts. For example, 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. It is a fact. Capital city of Telangana is Hyderabad. It is a fact. The capital city of India is New Delhi. It is a fact. Like this, so many facts children memorize. But learning means not only memorization, learning also involves higher forms of thinking, such as analysis, evaluation, creativity, etc. When it comes to Bloom's division, Bloom divided what and how we learn into three separate domains. These are cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain. In the previous slides, I have shown that cognitive domain means it is related to knowledge. Affective domain means it is related to our attitudes. Psychomotor domain means it is related to skills. Let us see cognitive domain more clearly. This particular cognitive domain consists of content knowledge of a specific subject and the intellectual skills in it. There are 6 major categories in cognitive domain. It includes various cognitive outcomes, which include simple behavior, for example, recall or recognition, to complex behavior, for example, evaluation. So when we are talking about cognitive domain, we have to understand that cognitive domain consists of knowledge of a particular subject, a specific subject, and also skills related to intellectual abilities. That means intellectual skills. Again, these 6 major categories in cognitive domain, when we see, it includes various cognitive outcomes, starting from simple behavior, for example, recalling something or recognizing something, to complex behavior, for example, evaluating something. When it comes to cognitive outcomes often represent the outcomes most closely related to deeper thinking and lifelong learning, as well as outcomes we value most. So these are the important things related to cognitive domain and cognitive outcomes. When it comes to simple behavior or lower level of learning, we have to understand that lower level of learning is always easier to assess, but it do not reflect what the students can do with the acquired knowledge or information. That is the limitation of lower level learning or simple learning. When it comes to cognitive domain outcomes, they can be elaborated like this. One is recall. Recall is nothing but it is our ability to recall what has been learned. For example, when we learn capital city of Telangana as Hyderabad, when the situation demands, then we can recall the capital city of Telangana as Hyderabad. Similarly, when we learn tables, for example, depending upon the situation, we can recall the tables. For example, 6 5s is 30, 7 9s is 63. Like that, we can recall the factual information. After recall, another cognitive domain outcome is comprehension. Comprehension means nothing but it shows a basic understanding of a concept. Next one is application. Application means it is the ability of an individual to apply learning to a new or novel task or context. When it comes to analysis, Analysis indicates the ability to break up information logically. Similarly, when it comes to synthesis, synthesis is the ability to create something new. When it comes to evaluation, evaluation is the ability to evaluate the usefulness of something for a purpose. So these are the major domain outcomes of cognitive domain. Now let us take affective domain. Affective domain majorly consists of our feelings, our values, appreciation, enthusiasm, motivation, attitude, etc. Affective domain outcomes are generally tend to be the hardest to articulate initially, and also they are often appear very different to assess at first glance. When we want to see the affective domain outcomes, these are the important affective domain outcomes. We can elaborate them like this. Students become aware of an attitude or behavior or value in their day-to-day life. Students exhibit a reaction or change as a result of exposure to an attitude, behavior, or value in their day-to-day life. Students recognize value and display this through involvement or commitment in their day-to-day life. And also, students determine a new value or behavior as important or a priority in their day-to-day life. Students integrate consistent behavior as a naturalized value in spite of discomfort or certain cost. The value is recognized as a part of the person's character in one's life. So these are the things related to effective domain outcomes. Next, let us take psychomotor domain. Psychomotor domain defines all the physical skills or tasks. Psychomotor domain consists of use of the gross and fine motor skills such as physical movement and coordination. When we take psychomotor domain learning outcomes, they are related to the skills we can observe. Development of various psychomotor skills requires practice. So without practice, it is very difficult to get psychomotor domain skills. So practice plays an important role. These skills are generally measured in terms of speed, accuracy, techniques in execution, etc. So this is about psychomotor domain. If we want to see the psychomotor domain outcomes, we can say students translate sensory input into physical tasks or activities in their day-to-day life, and students are able to replicate a fundamental skill or task in their day-to-day life. Students recognize standards or criteria important to perform a skill or task correctly in their day-to-day life, and students use standards to evaluate their own performances and make corrections in their day-to-day life. And also, students apply these particular skills to real-life situations in their day-to-day life. Students are able to instruct or train others to perform in these skills in other situations in their day-to-day life. So these are the points related to psychomotor domain outcomes. Now let us take types of learning. In one of our previous slides, while discussing learning, we say learning is relatively permanent change in the behavior because of experience or because of practice. If we take some definitions given by eminent psychologists related to learning, one of the definitions given in our module is G. Kimble definition. According to G. Kimble, learning is nothing but it refers to a relatively permanent change. You have to understand this phrase clearly. Learning indicates a relatively permanent change. It is not absolutely permanent change. Absolute change means when we get a change in the behavior, then we won't get any further change in the behavior. It becomes static. But the behavioral change, whatever we get because of learning, is not like that. It is dynamic. That means from time to time, we find certain changes in the learned behavior. That is why we call the change in the behavior as relatively permanent change. In response, potentiality which occurs as a result of reinforced practice. So here, according to G. Kimble, what plays major role in learning means, in behavioral change means reinforced practice. That means when we practice something, when we get a certain reward for that, it is known as reinforced practice. For example, when a small child is learning how to write a particular word, apple, A-P-P-L-E, apple, for example, when the child says the word correctly, apple, or when the child pronounces the word correctly, apple, or when the child writes the word learning, when the child writes the word apple correctly, then either parents or teachers generally they appreciate, they give some reward. The reward may be just saying very good, excellent work, like that. Or the reward may be giving something to the child, presenting a pen, presenting a pencil, presenting a notebook. Like this, we reinforce the practice. So when the child gets a positive reinforcement, then the child tries to practice certain things again and again. So this particular practice leads to relatively permanent change in the behavior of an individual. When we see learning theories, there are different learning theories. Most of the learning theories put an effort to codify, systematize the operations and to hypothesize about the underlying mechanisms of learning. We have to understand that learning may be classified into different categories. For example, verbal learning, social constructive learning, and mindfulness learning. These are the important types of learning. Now let us discuss one by one all these types of learning. When it comes to verbal learning, we have to understand that the learning of verbal behavior is known as verbal learning. This particular verbal learning refers acquisition, retention, and recalling of verbal content. Whatever may be the verbal content, when we acquire that verbal content, when we retain it, when we recall it, depending upon the situation, all indicates verbal learning. The spoken language, the communication devices are part of this learning. If we take the spoken language, for example, each and every child who is born on this planet Earth learns very easily how to speak in his or her mother tongue. That means learning how to speak in the mother tongue. It happens very naturally at a very small age. The child learns by imitation from parents, family members, from neighbors, etc. So when it comes to verbal learning, spoken language is learned very easily without much effort. Various instruments such as words, sounds, symbols, pictures, figures are used in verbal learning. All of you know that when we learn something verbally, we use various types of instruments. The instrument may be a word, it may be a sound, it may be a symbol, it may be a picture, or it may be a figure. And another important thing is this particular verbal learning is a unique feature of human beings. So our language, the capacity to acquire language, the ability to learn a particular language differentiates human beings from other animals. It is one of the unique characteristics of human beings. We call human beings scientifically as Homo sapiens. So Homo sapiens' unique quality is verbal learning. Unique feature is verbal learning. We have to understand that we acquire much of our knowledge about various objects and events in the form of words. Generally, it is the study of learning using verbal stimulus materials and verbal responses. So when psychologists study verbal learning in the laboratory conditions, they use a lot of material which involves verbal stimulus materials and also verbal responses. So verbal stimulus materials and verbal responses are very important in the study of verbal learning. And another important thing when it comes to verbal learning is it is influenced by many factors. Especially if we want to see the major factors, they are features of the material to be learned by a particular learner. Features of the material means, for example, it may be how meaningful the material is. That means meaningfulness of the content definitely influences the verbal learning. That means when a child is learning something, when a child is involved in verbal learning, if the content is meaningful, then the verbal learning will be more effective, more efficient. And another important feature of the material to be learned is length of the content. So whether the content is small or whether the content is lengthy, it influences the verbal learning. Generally, children learn very easily when the content is small. If the content is very lengthy, then children face a lot of difficulties to learn that particular content. So psychologists identified certain things related to verbal learning and also related to the features of the content and the length of the content. According to various psychological studies, learning time is proportional to length of the material. That means if the length of the material is more, it takes more time. If the length of the material is less, it takes less time to learn it. And we have to understand another important point. When we are talking about learning, the strength of the learning increases with increased time of learning. That means if a child is putting more time, if a child is putting more effort on learning something, then learning increases proportionally, and verbal learning may be intentional or unintentional. That means sometimes we learn a lot of things related to verbal learning intentionally, and sometimes without intentionally also we learn a lot of things. Next, let us see social learning. When it comes to social learning, we have to understand that we learn many things through just by observation. That means by observing others' behavior, that means other people's behavior, other people's attitudes, we learn so many things. Simply we can say, when we take a young child, the young child learns a lot of behavior through observation. Observing parents, observing other family members, observing neighbors. Suppose if the child is attending to school, observing the teachers, observing the friends, peer group, like this, various factors influences social learning. So in social learning, major component is observation, and major learning outcomes are related to behavior and related to attitudes. So our attitudes are learned, which comes under social learning. If we see the scientist who is behind this social learning, we have to understand that Albert Bandura is a famous American psychologist. Albert Bandura is a prominent American psychologist. Albert Bandura proposed this social learning theory. Simply we can say, learning observes by imitation. Learning happens just by observation. Albert Bandura emphasized that we learn from one another through observation and imitation or modeling. So this concept is very important. Social learning, observational learning. Simply some of the psychologists use the word observational learning and some use social learning. So social learning is related to our behavior, related to our attitudes, where we observe the behavior of others and simply we copy, we model, we observe the behavior or attitudes of others. Now, let us see the steps involved in social learning. Are there any steps in social learning? There are steps. The most important steps in social learning are: one is related to attention, second one is related to retention, third one is related to reproduction, and fourth one is related to motivation. So these are the four important steps in social learning: attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. Four important steps of social learning. Let us see one by one all these four steps elaborately. When we take attention, attention is nothing but it refers to the process of an awareness of our environment, and the model behavior is attended by an individual in this step. That means when the individual looking towards another individual, when the individual pays attention on the other individual, then that is the first step in social learning. So attention is very important. Wherever the children pay attention, they learn from that context. So this particular attention is involved by various factors. Again, for example, distinctiveness. If something is differing other things, then our attention catches like anything. If something is very complex, we attend it. And our sensory capacities are regularly bombarded by lot of information from the environment. So these are the things related to attention process. Now let us take retention. Retention is nothing but it refers to remembering certain things. So when we pay attention, then we learn something. When we remember it, when we retain in our mind, then only it is possible to make use of the learned information. So remembering is very important. It is the second stage in social learning, which is popularly known as retention. So in this particular step, the individual remembers the model behavior as images in his or her memory. So the individual remembers the model behavior. Model means wherever the learner wants to replicate the behavior, that is known as model behavior. That may be related to hairstyle, that may be related to dressing style, that may be related to walking, that may be related to communication, whatever it may be. When the child, after paying certain attention on a particular behavior, when the particular behavior component is retained in the mind, then only it is possible for the child or for the student to use that particular information. Next, reproduction. Reproduction is the third step in social learning. In reproduction, it is nothing but it refers to reproducing the image from the memory. Whatever may be the image which is retained in the memory, depending upon the need, depending upon the situation, depending upon the context, the individual reproduces that particular behavior. Reproduction happens from memory. So in this particular step, the model behavior which was attended and remembered is transformed into action. So reproducing means nothing but we can see it in the behavior of the individual. We can see the attended information which transfers into action form after suitable analysis, such as acceptability to the individual and the environment or society. For example, when a particular individual pays attention on something, learns it, retains it in the mind, when the individual wants to reproduce, when the individual wants to show that particular learning component in his behavior form or in her behavior form, that is known as reproduction. So generally, reproduction happens after suitable analysis. The individual checks himself or herself whether a particular behavior is reproduced, it is okay for the society or not. If it is okay for the social environment or not. Is it okay to the people, those who are surrounded him or her or not. Like this, the individual do lot of analysis before reproduction. After reproduction, the fourth step is motivation. When a particular behavior is reproduced by a particular individual, if the individual gets a positive reinforcement, either verbal form or in objective form, when there is positive reinforcement for the behavior, then there will be motivation in the child, in the learner. So motivation refers having a specific reason to imitate a behavioral aspect. For example, if a child is imitating the hairstyle of a celebrity, when the child wants to imitate, learn the hairstyle of the celebrity, we can see all these steps in that learning, which is known as social learning. First, the child has to pay attention towards the hairstyle of the celebrity. After that, the child has to understand the pattern of hairstyle, and the child has to retain that particular hairstyle in his mind, and with the help of elders, the child may reproduce that particular hairstyle. If the child is getting positive reinforcement for that particular hairstyle, then the child tries to come with the same type of hairstyle every time. So here, what motivates the individual to have a particular hairstyle means the motivation related to having a specific reason towards that hairstyle motivates the individual to go with that particular hairstyle. So in motivation step, the model behavior which is reinforced is adopted for further continuation. For example, instead of positive reinforcement, if there is a negative reinforcement, that means if parents or teachers discourages the learner, the learning component related to a specific thing, such as hairstyle, then when the child is continuously getting discouragement from the elders, then the child may not go with the new hairstyle next time. So it all depends upon what happens after reproducing a certain behavior, whether the learner is getting a positive reinforcement or not. That is important. Positive reinforcement acts as a motivational factor, and again the individual repeats a particular behavior. So these are the 4 important steps in social learning: attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. Next, you have another concept in your syllabus which is related to social constructivism. This particular concept, social constructivism, was proposed by Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky is a prominent Russian psychologist. He is from Russia. According to Vygotsky, the learning has a collaborative nature. That means students learn best when they collaborate each other. According to Vygotsky, it is not possible to separate learning from its social context or situation. That means lot of learning components are context dependent, social situation dependent. Depending upon the situation, depending upon the context, the learner learns lot of things. And this particular psychologist emphasizes that all cognitive functions of human beings originate in social context. That is, social context means that is nothing but interaction with other human beings. So learning did not simply comprise the assimilation and accommodation of new knowledge or skill, and it is the process by which learners are integrated into a knowledge community through social interactions. So social interactions plays an important role when the child is acquiring knowledge. So this is very important, social constructivism concept. This particular psychologist, Vygotsky, developed another concept which is popularly known as zone of proximal development. Zone of proximal development means it is nothing but indicates the level of potential development in a learner. So the level of potential development is known as the zone of proximal development. In shortcut, we call it as ZPD. This particular zone of proximal development indicates the level of development that a learner is capable of reaching, how far the learner can go in the journey of learning. ZPD indicates that the learner may reach it under the guidance of a teacher or in collaboration with peer group. So, in zone of proximal development, what plays an important role means the teacher plays an important role or the peer group plays an important role. Particularly when the child is learning the concepts from the adults, those who are having more in-depth knowledge in that concept, then it helps better for the child. One more important thing here you have to remember is zone of proximal development is the difference between what a learner can do without help and what the learner can do with the help of others. This refers the zone of proximal development. So it is the difference between what the learner can learn individually and what the learner can learn in a group, in a collaborative environment. So collaborative or group learning is a process of peer interaction which is mediated and structured by a teacher. So the teacher facilitates group learning or collaborative learning for the full development of various inner potentials in the learners. Next, let us take transfer of learning. When a child is learning something, to make the learning more effective, the learning component has to transfer to various situations. So, according to psychologists, there are 3 types of transfer of learning. One is positive transfer of learning. Positive transfer of learning means transfer of knowledge or skills which are considered to be positive if the previous learning facilitates new learning. For example, learning of addition always helps for learning of multiplication. Here, what is happening means if a particular child is strong in addition, definitely it makes easy to learn multiplication. So here what is happening means a lot of positive transfer is happening. Similarly, when we take playing badminton and tennis, somewhat these 2 games are similar. So if a child acquires a lot of expertise in badminton, definitely this particular skill helps to play tennis in a better manner. So this type of transfer is known as positive transfer. That means when the learner is learning certain things or when the learner is getting certain skills, if there is a possibility of transferring this particular knowledge or skills to another area and getting benefit from that, it is positive transfer of learning. Now let us take negative transfer of learning. Negative transfer of learning means transfer of knowledge or skills when they retard the new learning, when they act as an obstacle for the new learning. For example, if we take vocabulary of English language, if a child is learning the pronunciation of PUT, put, if the child is successful in learning the pronunciation of PUT, put, then what happens means when it comes to learn BUT, the child may say instead of but, So why it is happening means the child is familiar with the word PUT, put. So the child feels that here also the spelling is similar. So BUT might be but. The child may say like that. So here what is happening means the learning, whatever happened at one place is negatively influencing the learning in a new context. Such type of examples, we can give a lot of examples. Now, if the transfer of knowledge or skills considered to be zero transfer, if the previous learning neither facilitates nor retards new learning. So in the previous two examples, when we are discussing about positive transfer or when we are discussing about negative transfer, what we are saying, we are talking about the impact of previous learning on the present learning or new learning. If the impact is positive, that means if the previous learning facilitates the new learning, then it is known as positive transfer. Instead of facilitating, if the previous learning is obstructing the new learning, then we call it as negative transfer. Sometimes what happens means the previous learning neither facilitates nor obstructs the new learning. In such cases, such type of learning is known as zero transfer of learning. For example, if a child is learning how to play a guitar, after that, if the child wants to learn how to play football, there is no much similarity between guitar and football. So here in this particular context, what happens means zero transfer happens. That means the child neither gets benefit from the guitar playing skills or the guitar playing skills nor obstructs the learning of football game for a particular child. So these are the three types of transfer of learnings: positive transfer, negative transfer, and zero transfer. Now let us see the last concept in your block 3. It is related to mindfulness in learning. When we are learning a particular concept, how to learn that concept? According to recent psychological researches, when we learn something mindfully, then our learning will be more effective. We learn better. So, what is the meaning of this mindfulness in learning? Let us see. Mindfulness can be described as the practice of paying attention on purpose in the present moment and doing it intentionally. So, when we are doing something, when we are learning something, if our attention is in the present moment, then we can say we are mindful in learning. Mindfulness is a process of engagement. That means you have to understand that mindfulness is nothing but it is a process of engagement. More engagement means we are more mindful of certain learning. Less engagement means less mindfulness. So it can be seen as a simple process of noticing new things. When we involve in mindful learning, we can see a lot of things, we can notice a lot of new things effectively. When we notice new things, what happens? When we notice new things, it puts us in the present moment. That means our attention will be in the present moment when we are noticing new things. If we ignore the new things, our attention may not be related to present. It may be either going back or it may be going into future. That means it may be related to either past or future. In our day-to-day life, everything is transitory. We have to understand that when we see our day-to-day life, when we analyze our day-to-day life, lot of things are transitory. That means we can see always changes in whatever we see. We can observe that everything looks different from different perspectives. So if we see something with a particular perspective, then we can see something. If we change our perspective, then we can see other things in that particular aspect. So these are the things related to mindfulness in learning. Now finally, let us see the principles involved in mindfulness in learning. There are 5 principles which help to achieve a mindful state while learning a new concept. When the child is learning a new concept, when the student is learning a new concept, when the child wants or when the student wants to be in the mindful state, then what are the required things? What are the required principles? If we want to see, these are the important principles which are involved mindfulness in learning. When the learner is being open to novelty, that means if we are noticing new things with an open mind, if we are novel to new things, if we are open to novelty, then it helps for mindfulness in learning. Similarly, when the learner is alert to distinctions, that means when there are distinct features related to a situation, related to an object, related to a person, whatever it may be, whatever may be the context, if the learner is being alert to distinction, then it brings the learner into mindfulness state. Another important thing is when the learner is adopting a sensitivity to different contexts. That means when the learner is very sensitive to various contexts, then it helps for mindfulness in learning. And having an implicit awareness of multiple perspectives of a certain aspect also puts the learner in mindfulness state. So when the learner is having an implicit awareness of various perspectives, that means multiple perspectives, when the learner wants to see something, if the learner is in a position to see that something from various directions, from various perspectives, then it puts the learner into mindfulness state when the learner is learning something. And the last and fifth principle is when the learner is being oriented in the present moment, it helps for mindfulness in learning. So these are the important principles which are related to mindfulness in learning. So students, in today's class from block 3, we have completed 3 chapters, 3 units. Remaining concepts we will discuss in the next class. So thank you very much. If you have any doubts, you can express. I try my best to clarify those doubts. So all of you, if you have any doubts, you can ask me. I will clarify the doubts. If the doubts are specific to examinations or some other things, administrative related, then you can call the Department of Psychology, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University, and you can clarify your doubts. So students, the final advice is based on these online classes, all of you are advised to study, to refer once again the modules, the material, whatever provided by Ambedkar Open University to you. Please try to read, refer the educational psychology module, and if you have any further doubts in block 3, you can ask your doubts in the next class also. Any doubts from any student?
No, sir, no doubt. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Very good. So let me conclude the today's session here. We will meet in the next class. Thank you. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best.